Welcome to Orthodox Family Life. Today we're talking about Orthodox community, and we're joined by Khouria Destinie and Matushka Constantina. So welcome to the show, ladies.
Thanks
Thank
for
you so
having us.
much.
Yeah, maybe if we could start with introductions. Khouria, it's your first time here. Would you like to start?
Sure. I'm Khouria Destiny of Ascetic Life of Motherhood. If you have followed on my blog or on my Instagram or Facebook. So my husband is an Orthodox Christian priest, and we are high school sweethearts. We met in high school and grew up Protestant, non-denominational, and discovered Orthodoxy in college. And that kind of threw a wrench into all the plans because he was preparing to be a pastor at the time. And so we didn't know then what we know now, that he would be preparing for the priesthood. So it was a blessing, but certainly an uncertain time joining the church in our life. We didn't know what God was preparing us for. And so, yeah, now he's an Orthodox priest. We have 4 children and 1 on the way. So I'll be having another baby in March of next year. So that's exciting. And I like to share about just sort of how you embrace the liturgical rhythms in the church into your home, specifically through the lens of being a convert and a mom myself, kind of learning alongside my kids. So that's my joy and the thing that I love to share about. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And I love your content. And it's definitely something I would have used when my kids were little, but way back then there was, as you know, nothing like this available.
Sure.
So yeah, it's really great. So welcome back, Matushka.
It's good to be back. So my story is similar to Khouria because we were university sweethearts, and Father John was preparing to become an Anglican priest when we found Orthodoxy. So yeah, other than a couple books that I've written, and I'll just mention because I always forget. So the Son of Holiness, which was when we lived in Greece, experiences in Greece. Students of Grace is when we lived in stories about South Korea and North America and Greece as well. And my most recent book, Upon This Rock. And I forgot to mention all these times that this photograph, the cover was taken by my sister.
Oh,
Kate,
wow.
Wonderful.
she's the photographer, and the photo on the back as well. We had gone hiking, and I didn't with my family last year when they were visiting. And I had my nice clothes in my bag. I just pulled them over when we got up to the top of the mountain. I went into behind some bushes and came out so we could have a photo shoot without me having to tell Father John ahead of time because he wouldn't have wanted to do it. He took those pictures too. So we live on the island of Newfoundland, and we serve the only Orthodox parish in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. So the province of Newfoundland and Labrador is so geographically large, it would be the 4th largest state if it was a part of the United States. So it's just a little bit smaller than California. And the next nearest Orthodox parish is about 700 miles away. So it's the distance between New York City and Chicago.
Wow.
So,
well, I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on this as someone who lives in a very big area, but with just this one small church that you're in, right? This is it. So I think a lot of people are in that situation. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that. So maybe I thought we could start with just some really sort of basic questions about Orthodox community, and then move into the deeper questions that we kind of came up with. So why are people searching for community now? This seems to be everywhere online. People are talking about it, thinking about it, trying to form different communities. What do you think is driving that?
Khouria, you always go first.
Look, I have theories. I don't know, but it's interesting because I like that you pointed that out, that it's kind of in the air. I would say maybe about 5 years ago, this is before COVID even started, we were already in a lonely epidemic, as we would call it. And I remember looking into this a bit more back then and seeing that there is as a world, as a culture, I guess, wherever we are, in America especially, we're just so disconnected. And I think that has a lot to do with technology. And it probably has a lot of other complicated factors as well. But people are lonely, people feel isolated, people feel this innate desire for community and connection and belonging. And so I think that, especially in the Orthodox Church, I think that there is something there that you don't find in the world. There's something a little bit, it stands apart, that there is a sense of, and not everybody's doing it perfectly, but a desire for community with one another, living out our faith in a community. And you can see this in other, you know, churches and places and stuff too. But I think especially the Orthodox Church is answering part of that call. And again, we're not doing it perfectly, but I think it has to do with just a general spirit in the world of feeling disconnected and desiring for a sense of community or belonging. And we can kind of further define what that means and what people are looking for. But that's my kind of just like a bigger picture view of what I think is going on.
Yeah, I think that is true, that it is probably more now than maybe we've seen in a long, maybe ever, of people wanting a community and wanting a place to belong. I think that there's two probably primary things for that. One is the breakdown of the family in every sense, everywhere, whether or not you're Christian. And that lack of stability and community that comes with having a family that, even if you don't particularly feel close to them, still there's familial customs that you would be participating in.
Mm-hmm.
When your family's divided, when your parents are divorced, when they marry someone else, you have all these things that are like, it's a fractured sense of community because it's not a united community where you can all be together. It's like it's divided up. Christmas this time I'm with mom, and at Easter I'll be with that. So that all of this gets fragmented into that, whatever would have naturally been the times that we would be with community, with our own family at least. I saw that a lot with working on the front line as a social worker. You really saw the impact that the breakdown of the family unit has on people. And the other thing I would say is I really genuinely believe that love has grown cold in our times, and people really have come to sense this. And so this prevailing loneliness that has led to countless suicides and countless drug overdoses is because people don't feel loved, and they don't know what it means to be loved or to show love. And that is so isolating. And that is why people die by suicide. It is why people fall into addiction and can't get out of that cycle. It's just a crippling loneliness and without any mechanisms to combat it. So I do think, of course, that the answer is in the Orthodox Church, that the answer is always Christ. And it's nice that we're starting to see in our part of the world that other people are starting to recognize that. And that's why we are starting to see an influx of people who weren't necessarily raised in the faith, but have started to seek it out. I'm sure if you asked everyone, a lot of people, a big motivator would be the lack of community and that feeling of loneliness to some extent.
Yeah, I think while this is kind of coming to a head now, I know I have felt the lack of community specifically since I was a mom, since I had my first child, because so much of what I realized in that experience was so much of what we know about being a mom or being a grandmother or a sister or an aunt is that someone modeled that for you. You were in that relationship on the receiving end. And so now it's, my sister, she just had her first grandbaby. It's very exciting. But because our own grandparents weren't involved in our lives, she's like, I don't know what this is supposed to look like. I have no idea how to do this. And she's going to be great. She's a great grandmother. But there's a lot of that we're just lacking, those skills, the unconditional love that your family gives you, that's so important to our development and then being able to pass that on. So I think everything, it's culminating now, with the tech side and kind of the craziness of the last few years, but it's been building for decades.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I think Khouria was right to point out, it has a lot to do with the internet. Mm-hmm. Rather than the internet helping to make people feel less alone, it has further isolated people. It is just this mechanism where you look and you say, okay, but that's not me. Okay, but that person's life isn't mine. That person's happiness isn't my happiness. And it somehow, not somehow, I think we can all get to the bottom of why, but it has really pushed people to feel more isolated instead of a part of a community. And it's because I don't think it's an authentic community. You can learn things, but it's definitely not a community. For community, we need to be able to actually love one another and bear each other's burdens. And you just can't do that on the internet.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, we were going to go there anyway, so let's go ahead and get there now, and then we'll jump back to some of the more easy questions at the end. But so what do we mean when we say Orthodox community?
Hmm.
What are we talking about? Are we talking about the church? Are we talking about the parish? Khouria, I'm
I
going to
don't
put you on the
think so.
spot first.
My husband and I were talking about that in preparation for this panel because I always appreciate his perspective too, because he was telling me the same questions. Like, okay, break down, what does that mean? What is an Orthodox community? And I was like, okay, I think how I define it is probably more like a sense of belonging, you know, yeah, like being supported and supporting others, and feeling like we share life like in the church, you know. So I think what he pointed out too is that like a lot of that is feelings based, a lot of that is kind of subjective, you know. It's not like it could change and you could all of a sudden not feel a part of that. So it's like, yeah, that's interesting. So maybe that's not a perfect definition of Orthodox community. I think that's maybe what I'm longing for, you know, is like this like meaningful relationships. But I think that's not necessarily Orthodox community. So I'm just going to give you my those are just kind of my raw thoughts. So I'd like to hear kind of more what you guys, how you would think about Orthodox community and what does that look like?
Yeah, I would think like your experience of a church and my experience are vastly different, right? Like
Right.
you're having now like 400 people coming to your
Right.
services,
Right.
and we would have we're like getting up there for us, and getting up there is like 35.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if we had 35 people, it's like, wow, we had a ton of people today.
Right.
So obviously, yeah, it is very subjective. So I think like for me, and having lived now, like having gone, literally we lived in Thessaloniki. So like the most like Orthodox city of Greece, I would say. I mean, obviously there's lots of beautiful places and like the islands have lots of saints, but like Thessaloniki is like a historical place. You know, from the scriptures, letters to the Thessalonians from the Apostle Paul, places where St. Paul walked and preached and wept because the Jews wouldn't listen to him. So we went from that really where every single night there's a vigil. So we went from a place where at very least, you know, when you're on a bus with everybody going just down the city road, people are crossing themselves when they go in front of a church, which is like every couple minutes. That in a certain way it's artificial, like in the sense that you won't necessarily know people, but you feel a part of something that like you have as the central fixture of your whole life is the Orthodox Church. And in this environment, you feel like that is so prominent that you walk into a shop and there's icons and all these things. And then we moved to this place where the last, you know, they've had a mission now for 22 years. It was without a priest though for 8 before we came here. And so the last known Orthodox Christians that we knew who dwelt on this island were the Vikings. Because the actual Viking king, Ericsson, was an Orthodox Christian. When he came onto the island of Newfoundland in the Northern Peninsula, they redid the settlement that the Vikings had built there. So I've started to think of community very differently since being here. And I ultimately think Orthodox community means being a member of the body of Christ. And that supersedes any of the physical places that we dwell in. And whether or not we feel like we have belonging is then contingent on us. That's like, now we have to judge how right am I with God and in how much connection am I with God? Because if it's always relying on someone else, like someone else being like the community that we find around us, then we have no control over that, whether or not we're a part of it, whether or not we feel like we belong. All those things are outside of us. Do you know what I'm saying?
But that's literally what my husband said. So I'm like, yep. I hear, like he said, it's almost like the last line you said is like verbatim what he said.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't control.
Being a part of the body of Christ, we can control that. And that does bring belonging with it, and validation and comfort and feelings of inclusion instead of exclusion.
Right.
Maybe it would be helpful to think about what is the purpose then.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's not, at least what I'm thinking is it's not bad to want these community connections, what we think of as friendships and the support that you get. But that's really like village life, right? Like that everyone throughout all of history has had, except for the modern world, like very recently, right?
Mhm.
And in America, it's different too because we're coming from a variety of cultures and backgrounds where if you're in a Greek village, you're all Greeks, right? Like you have a shared history and a shared culture. And so I think it makes American ortho villages, whatever we want to call them, a little more difficult because we're all fairly new to the church and we're all coming from different places. So it's a real, like it's a challenge, but it's a blessed challenge. So what are we trying to do in the community besides
Mhm.
live next to each other and work together?
Yeah.
Matushka, you want to take this one?
Yeah, you did this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, a young woman who's like an inquirer at my brother's church in New Brunswick recently came to Newfoundland. Her parents are living here. And she and I went for a hike on Friday and we chatted a bit about this because she's an inquirer, especially I wanted to sort of get her thoughts on community and everything. And I forget exactly where I was going with that specifically, but we talked about different things, and that was something she had raised is like the need for patience. So she said, when I said, I think sometimes there can be this conception like we'll all get along because we're all going to be like-minded and we're all going to raise our kids the same way and we're all going to think the same way. And then you actually come into real contact with that and it's like an explosion.
Mm-hmm.
And personalities clash and viewpoints aren't united like you thought, a line that you thought that they would be. And that can be a bit shocking, right? Because we just assume that we're going to all think alike because Christ is at the center and our Orthodox faith is at the center. But that's what it is to be in a community. It's to have different personalities. It's to have different things that are a little bit out of alignment. But so when the young girl said it's about like learning how to be patient, it's like, yeah, really that has a lot to do with it. Is this the idea that the purpose of community should be for us to be refined as people. So that takes a lot of things. It's like when they talk about two rough stones that have to rub against each other, when they rub against each other, then they become smooth. Like our passions are naturally going to be manifested in a community. Father John now for Sunday, for his homily series, he's doing the Ever Getting Nos, which is like sayings from the fathers, and he like chooses a different theme each week. And one of the weeks was like on anger. And he and I had chatted a bit about like the idea of community and stuff. And his thing was like, well, one of the main things is like for us to learn to deal with our passions, to learn like this young woman said, to learn patience, to bear one another's burdens. I think when we have that perspective, then we won't be so shocked when we encounter people who, if you only saw them at church, you maybe think of them as like the most pious, the most amazing, the most quiet, soft-spoken, and then just put them in a little bit of a different context. Like I would appear like a patient person. I've watched her talks. I've heard the way she speaks. Yeah, but you haven't seen me when I'm trying to make my coffee and concentrate on whatever, something I'm listening to. And my husband speaks to me and I'm snapping at him because I'm too preoccupied. You know what I mean? Like, of course it can appear a certain way. So I think the purpose of community, if we have in our mind, the purpose of community is for me to be purified and for me to bear the burdens of others, then we'll have a healthier mindset when we go into it and we won't be so easily scandalized, which very, very easily can happen. We get scandalized. We assume people are a certain way and they're not. And that's on us when we assume that.
Yeah. I think that's super, super insightful. And I love everything you said. I think just the idea of like encountering differences and being able to be together despite our differences. I think especially being, in a parish that I see these challenges, I think we might have this idealistic view of what Orthodox community is, which is what you kind of brought up. Like, oh, we're all this, we believe the same, we're going to raise our kids the same. And, we all kind of smile because we're like, when you encounter people in the real world, that's not actually the case. But that's not what's required. I think of it as like a family, and I kind of use that analogy a lot. And family sounds like familial, but it's like also dysfunction and, and also people bothering you. And, I think of it as family is because it's like, yeah, we know like that this is like, we have to deal with conflicts, any close relationship, whether that's your spouse, your siblings, your parents, like there's always going to be difficulties and challenges. And I appreciate your connection with the family and the breakdown of the family. I think that's super key too, because like we don't really know how to like be a united family in a lot of ways. I mean, some of us may have had a really good example growing up, but if we didn't, we kind of are like, we don't know how to deal with conflict. We don't know how to deal with people that disagree with us, or we don't know how to, it's like, oh, I disagree with them. I'm going to cut them off. I'm going to ghost them. I'm going to, go no contact. We have like kind of the world's dialectic with things like that, or we just have no patience. We have no patience for the people that are with us. And my husband also talks about like, when we stand in church, when we stand, shoulder to shoulder with our brothers and sisters, like we should be able to stand there with people who love us and who hate us, like we should be like standing shoulder to shoulder as if we're standing with the angels, it's like to have no regard for those things. Like we are here to worship God. So I like the idea of it being for our purification, for our salvation, and that is my feeling on the Orthodox Church. Like every Orthodox church, every little community, every little family, it's like everything you need for salvation is available here. That's what what being a part of the Orthodox Church is, or, it's like salvation is available to all. And that doesn't mean, we're all farmer homesteaders together and like living in the center of the town as the church. That's not what that means. It just means that like my salvation can be found here, and that could be pain and suffering too. So anyway, thank you for your insights on that. I think that's there's a lot to think about on what you brought up.
Yeah, and I think too, not just having patience, but having forgiveness for one another. Like and realizing that I might be scandalized by people, but I'm also scandalizing people. There are things that I do that hurt other people in the community, and it's really a miracle, I think, when you look at the church and you see this group of people from so many different backgrounds, so many different types of people coming together in unity. To me, that in itself is a miracle. Every Sunday we get together, because in the world we would not be together. There's nothing it is only Christ that connects everybody there. And I think as long as we're focusing on, how can this interaction with someone that was difficult, and sometimes I don't know what to do with it, like how can I grow closer to Christ through that interaction? To me, that's the crux of Orthodox community.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask about what about people who maybe have a hard time engaging in community? I think maybe the classic introvert. My husband is like this. He doesn't need a lot of social time, and we are making a sort of a distinction between community in the deeper sense and the socialness of the church. But he would prefer to probably go to church and then leave after the end of the service. And I think there's a lot of people that have a hard time with that, saying, why aren't you here? Why aren't you being part of the community? So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on that sort of a situation where some people are just overwhelmed by so many people, or they, for us, we had 4 kids. He had a wife, 4 kids, a job where he's managing. He was being, we were the stones that were rubbing up against him all the time. He wasn't disengaging from that.
Yes.
But church was just a lot for him. The social side of it, I mean,
Matushka, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my opinion is like, I understand why people want other people to stick around. I like that too. Like I like people to come to church and like stick around for a minute so I can like actually get a chance to say hello to you after and all those things. But I personally believe that the most important thing and the obligation of being a part of a community is to go to church. If you are going to church and you are doing like the things that you need to do to maintain your spiritual health, you're doing your prayer rule, you're fasting, all those things, I don't think that it's bad to avoid a little bit of the socialization of the community if you're also doing the things that you're responsible for. So for example, I don't think it's okay for people to say, which we've heard, I come to church to pray. I don't come here to clean and to take on responsibilities. Well, you can say that, but you have natural responsibilities when you belong to a church. When you belong to a community, whether you want to socialize or not, you still have natural obligations. And some of those things, it means that you have to clean, or you have to lend a hand, or you have to, there's loads of different things. It doesn't have to be like outrageous, like where you're demanding you need to be here so you can set up the video thing or whatever so we can watch movies. Like, no, we're talking about like the basics just for the functioning of a parish or for the functioning of a community. But Universidad Macrina of Volo, like specifically in her homilies, their homilies to nuns, but in a specific homily, I think it's homily 19, she specifically speaks to lay people and she says, you should go to work and then you should go home to your house. And in your house, you should do your prayers and you should do your prayer. You should do your prayer, she said, and you should do your prostrations. And everything should have a schedule where you say, at this hour, I do this thing, which Khouria knows because this is how she has to structure her life with her children and her home, right? Every hour has a certain purpose. And the other says, this is what the family home should be like. So that way you can fit into it. Okay, now I'm going to do supplication service. Now I'm going to do an Akatist hymn. And then all those spiritual duties get done. And one of the other things she says is and that you're making sure you're taking a spiritual inventory every day. You're having the time to sit down and to see, how did I spend my day? Where were my thoughts? What things agitated me? What things did I fall into that I want to avoid? So she actually encouraged lay people to avoid busyness. A part of that busyness is too many social activities and too much socialization, because then we don't have time to do our spiritual duties, or we feel too exhausted too. So it's like, those things are good, but there needs to be a balance. But if someone elects not to be engaged in them, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not a participating member of the community, because the best thing we can provide for our community is for us to actually have a strong relationship with Christ. That will actually positively impact our community more than any of those other things that we can do. So I don't think that that's a bad thing at all, as long as there's not like obligations that aren't being fulfilled, in order for the function of the community.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't thought about it in that sort of context, but that is really beautiful and I think helpful for anybody, social or not. For me, I am an extrovert, if that may not be a surprise. I am like an extrovert. Like if I'm alone too long, I start to feel a little bit sad. And so for me, it's harder to relate to that sort of like challenge, but I certainly know people who are very introverted, and I have known people that, they quietly serve a church, and typically it involves like nobody else around, and most people won't see those things. The only reason why I even was a witness to it was because I happened to be there, for a different purpose. So I think, of course, we shouldn't judge anybody in what their participation is or isn't. But I think it's also okay to be uncomfortable if, coffee hour or whatever staying isn't really your thing, and it could be really draining. It's like, it's okay to also still do that, and recognizing that, like, I always think of it in the lens of like, well, maybe somebody needs you, like in this, there's kind of like, who knows, like what the Lord is, someone's bringing someone really introverted who, doesn't really know how to talk about these things. They're not going to be like, hey, I'm new. So I think, and this may be just something that I feel as a priest's wife, but I feel like it's one of my roles or my jobs is to see the lonely people. Like I scan the room, and if there's someone alone, it like pains me, And so I think like, there's certain people that will see that and take that upon themselves. And then, maybe there won't be anybody there and they'll just sit by themselves. And so sort of just like having the lens of, I'm going to push myself a little bit today for the sake of Christ, and be encouraging to somebody today, or, just be available. But then, also recognizing that like we need to be doing our spiritual obligations. And I like what you said about our relationship with Christ being the most important thing. I'm thinking of, St. Herman of Alaska, who like lived in, seclusion and like had such a huge, impact on the world, even in his isolation. So obviously we have the models for this. So
well, that's with monasticism,
right?
That there, especially in monasticism where you can't go and visit their monastery, like St. Joseph the Hesychist wouldn't even open the gate to people. Actually, if you'll indulge me for a second, last week was the feast of Saint Moses the Ethiopian.
Yes.
And I don't know how, this surprised me that I'd never heard this story before. Because every day, the beginning of my workday, I read the Lives of the Saints, or I listen to the Lives of the Saints through Patristic Nectar.
Yeah.
So I don't know how this escaped my notice prior to now, but it told a story about a pilgrim who went to Scetis because he really wanted to meet Abba Arsenius the Great, who, you know, he was like a very knowledgeable person, had like been the tutor of some political official's son, and then he fled the world and went into the wilderness. So Abba Arsenius did not open the door to this pilgrim who had come to visit him. And the pilgrim was a little bit surprised. Like, he had made this big trip to meet this holy elder. So he moved on and he went and he met with Abba Moses. And Abba Moses received him with a great deal of love and showed him a huge amount of hospitality. So the pilgrim was so perplexed by these two holy men who acted so differently when he had come to seek community. And God revealed, and he like prayed about it, and God revealed to him, there was like, if I remember correctly, it was like there was like water, and there was a boat with Abba Arsenius in one, and another boat with Abba Moses. And in the boat where Abba Arsenius was, he was like accompanied by the Spirit of God. And the boat where Abba Moses was, angels were coming down and feeding him like honeycombs. And he saw that even though they had reacted differently to community, they were both blessed by God. And so I think that's also just important. Like, it really struck me because we were going to do this chat. It struck me because I never heard it and I thought it was really interesting, but also because it's like, it just shows that it's like different strokes for different folks, you know? And on the one hand, so like, even if you kind of are a bit more withdrawn as a person who lives in the world, that can still be valuable and it's still blessed by God. But also that the monastics, like you said, they're praying for us, and that their life of isolation has actually produced fruit in the world. Like, I think Saint Silouan says, if the saints cease to exist, then the end of the world would come. Like, it's only by virtue of the fact that we still have ascetics out there somewhere in the wilderness praying for us that we are even still on the face of the earth. So I thought that was just really amazing story. Sorry, Christine, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. Yeah, it's all about this like disordered, we can't put the socializing ahead of focusing on Christ, right? We focus on Christ. We try to love one another. And if there's times to socialize, we're not putting that down. It has a place there, but it's not, like you were saying, obligatory for like liturgy is like you really need the divine liturgy every week, right? And then just making that room for people, like people are in different places in their life, different personalities. I think what was interesting for my husband and I as we slowly worked through this issue, because it was a real issue for us. He worked many long hours where he's engaging with people all day. Again, a very busy house when he comes home. And then I want to stay for coffee hour because I've been home alone with 4 young children, right? It's like my chance to go and talk with adults. And so this was kind of a weekly issue that we had. So I can imagine maybe other moms have this. And at the time we lived too far away from church. We were about 45 minutes where we couldn't take 2 cars. And so every Sunday this kind of came to a head, and it was a difficult time for us, which leads to our next question, which is, does location matter? Should you try to live near your church? Like, how big of a deal is that? We lived at one point an hour and a half from church, briefly. And then we've actually also lived on the church property about 30 feet from the church. So we've had both extremes, and everything in between. So what do you think?
Well, I think that certainly, I mean, it's undeniable that location, being closer to the church makes you more able to go, and there's less barriers. But I don't think that that's necessarily a requirement. Obviously, we have parishioners as well who are traveling an hour and a half. Some of them are like 2 hours away. And so it is possible. And but I think, similarly, we lived like an hour away and we live 45 minutes away, and we just have progressively gotten closer with each move, because for us to make it to like midweek services, to make it to feast days, and obviously make it to liturgy, it takes an enormous amount of effort, especially living in the world and having obligations and things. So as much as we could, we tried to prioritize living closer. And there's an advantage there, I think, just living closer to the church. But again, that's not everybody's situation. But it is helpful. I would think like for myself, long term, I would always want to live as close as I could, as close as I could afford, or to the church as a goal in my future. Even if it's something I have to temporarily endure and work past. So that's sort of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, when we lived in New Brunswick, when we first became Orthodox, there was only one church there. So we traveled like an hour and a half to go to church. And for years traveled. And now my brother's the priest of that church, but he's also the priest of the one in Fredericton where we used to live, going to university. So his whole community travels actually when he does opposite Sundays.
Oh, wow.
So that's really nice. Like so it's like really, it's one community, but in two cities. But the older Greeks that live in that city in the south, St. John, they don't travel. But the younger people from, we've had parishioners who travel every single weekend, 4 hours.
God bless.
Wow.
And we have parishioners who've traveled 8 hours because they live in the next largest town, which is Corner Brook, and that's 8 hours away. So I personally am in full agreement. I think people should live as close to the church as possible. The really difficult thing about the place where we live, and we've had people from Labrador, so who would have to take an airplane here, maybe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So no one else out there can complain, okay?
Yeah, no, you got to take an airplane to church.
I think that from Labrador, it might actually be easier to go to Toronto than to come here. It might be just the weird, because it's kind of it's really close to northern Quebec. It's right actually on northern, like the land is connected to northern Quebec. But the difficult thing here is the population here is very small. It's only 500,000 in the entire province. 300,000 live on this Avalon Peninsula, which is just this tiny peninsula where the main city is St. John's, out here on like the east to, the most eastern point of North America outside of Greenland. And what's really difficult is it's very expensive to live over this way on the east, in the Avalon Peninsula, St. John's especially, because it's the only major city in the entire province. It's very expensive. A lot of people that are from here, it's like their whole family, they're like we call it from the Bay. So you're like either from town, which is St. John's, or you're from the Bay, which is every other part of the entire island. Most people have like family, like that's where they're from, right? So like to move into town, you have to have like a real reason, because you might have a cousin or something. Like we've had people come and like they're able to stay with their cousins and stuff, but it's very expensive if you want to move here compared to where you're likely living and maybe employed. So it definitely is a challenge, but where there's a will, there's a way. And I really think it's important for people to somehow figure out a way to be as close to church as possible, because it's so essential. And what we have unfortunately seen is some people who have moved to the island, they were, because that's a lot of times the people in our congregation are people who just move here for work or for study and move away. And some who have moved here for work but live too far away to come regularly have fallen away from the faith, which is perfectly natural, because unless you are a part of that community, the essentials being divine liturgy, confession, partaking of Holy Communion, if you're able at very least being at the services, has a devastating effect on your spiritual health. So I know it's hard. I see it like where we live, I see it, but I've also seen the negative effects that have come from it. So we've had people who, because they lived 8 hours away, they've moved away from the province in order to live near a church. And we fully support that. Like we love them. We wish they could have come to town. They couldn't. It's not easy to get work here. And we're happy that they're somewhere where there's a church, So we've had friends in Nova Scotia that became Orthodox 20 years ago. They lived in rural Nova Scotia. So it was, I think at least 3.5 hours, maybe more, to go to Halifax to church. And they just decided to move. And they actually ended up moving down to the States so that he could work down there and they could live near a monastery. And that's what works for them, because they wanted to have church all the time. And it wasn't. And even if you live near a parish, you're not necessarily going to have church all the time. It depends, right? If the priest is able to do however many services he can do, but they wanted services every day. So they moved to a place that would do services every day. Yeah. So I just think the main thing is like for us not to like rush into anything, we can get like enthusiastic and zealous and be like, that's it. I'm quitting my job. I'm moving to town. But we want to do things slowly, but definitely long term with a goal to be closer to church. Or maybe it means that, you figure out a way to get there on a very regular basis so that you're kind of accountable to that. Like, I'm committing to going to church at least once a month, even if I live 8 hours away.
Right.
And always makes me laugh when I read comments online and people are like, but I live 30 minutes away. And I'm like, 30 minutes away.
Yeah.
Like, literally, people drive 8 hours,
Yeah.
literally. Like,
Yeah.
I don't get that at all.
We have a parishioner who lives over 2 hours away, and he rents a room from a lady who lives in town on the weekends. And then he stays here for he gets here for a midweek service too. And again, God bless these people. Like, when they find, the church, they want their whole life here, and they do what they can to overcome those challenges, and Christ will help you. And, like you said, it doesn't happen necessarily immediately. Sometimes it's just being faithful and taking the long drives. Like, when we lived far away, to us Sunday was like the day. It was like we started early, we'd pack up like we were going for a day trip, and we didn't get home till 4 or 5 in the evening sometimes, because we would stay and we'd see for coffee hour, and if there's anybody we could hang out with, we would try to do that, because we lived too far to make it to the midweek services. So we just did our best to just be as much part of the community. And it took longer that way, but we did. I felt like we really became like we were them. And this is another thing too that I wanted to also talk about. We talk about community, we talked about maybe our expectations. I think being a part of the community is like Matushka said, being the body of Christ, but really it's like you being like, your identity is here in this church. Like, it's you. We're not looking at the church as we're not evaluating the church. We are the church. Like, it's us. So if we're making any kind of criticism of the church, it's like, we should see that as ourselves, and it's kind of like being a part of a family. It's like, oh, my family's crazy. It's like, well, you're in that family, and so
you're contributing to the crazy.
yeah, so anyway, that's one of the things when I say that too, I'm filtering it through. When I say I felt like we were part of the community, I felt like I was them. They were me. Like, I was a part of this. And so I think, again, there can be challenges, there can be ways of overcoming that distance. And, pray earnestly for God to help you, and He will give you a way.
And ultimately, that's the purpose of our life, right? When Christ prayed at the Last Supper, that they may be one. When you say, I felt like I was them and they were me, that's because you were united in Christ. You felt like you were one. That's what we're seeking. We're not seeking a superficial sense of belonging. We're seeking an authentic experience with the triadic God who unites all of us together, because He is our creator and He is love. Like, when you think of the scriptures and well, go to the scriptures, where does it tell you to create a community? Christ tells us, love God and love your neighbor. That's the community. And so when St. Porphyrius, who very much this line was so important to him, that they may be one, he is so fueled by love. That is the actual goal of our community. Because exactly like you said, Khouria, if we see ourselves as the church, then we're so quick to forgive wrongs, just like we always are when it's our own fault, right? Like, we can justify ourselves because we understand the whole reason why we acted the way we did. We understand the whole background. It's easy to justify ourselves. So when things aren't in a good place, we see it as, I have a part to play in this, but that ultimately you feel like this genuine belonging together, that together we are seeking something greater, and we're seeking God. So St. Porphyrius would say, and I thought of this when I was thinking about our chat today, he had this quote, let me see if I think I have it here. This is what he had said, and I think honestly this is like the heart of the matter for community. Don't be concerned about whether other people love you, but about whether you love Christ and other people. That's the only way for your soul to feel filled. That's the only way to fill your soul. That's what he says. That's the only way to fill your soul. Because if you first love Christ and you love other people, a lot of times I think we can get caught up in, do people like me? Do people love me?
Right.
they don't defer to me, they don't include me. But if our whole aim is to first love Christ and then to worry about whether or not we love others,
Yeah,
then our act of loving will make us feel like we're loved back.
absolutely.
We won't see it as like this, of like the person doesn't like me, they don't defer to me, they don't include me. Because our love will be so natural to us that instead of it, we won't even think of it as our love. We'll think of it as their love to us.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you said. Exactly. They were me and I was them. Like that is the goal.
That's
And
beautiful.
that's not subjective. That's not outside of our grasp. And it's not reliant on anyone. It's only reliant on me. If I worry more about loving someone else, then I will always feel loved. I will always feel belonging, and I'll always feel part of the community.
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful experiences I've had in each community that I've been a part of is participating in forgiveness vespers. I always leave forgiveness vespers, and sometimes not churches don't do this. I'm like, please do this. Everybody needs to do this. Forgiveness vespers is one of those moments where it's like I look around our room and I'm like, I need your forgiveness. I need all of your forgiveness. Please forgive me, and then being able to forgive. It is one of the most Christian experiences I've ever had, out apart from liturgy, just to be able to embrace our brothers and sisters in Christ. And I always encourage people to go to that because it's powerful, because like you said, like measuring it based on how well I'm loving God or loving others or loving, my neighbor, seeing that as our, measure of community is a beautiful thing, and if we are perfectly loving, if we were saintly, we're not going to be like, oh, they didn't acknowledge me today, or we're not going to like see these faults in people and like psychoanalyze them. It's like, we cover the sins of our brothers in a sense so that we don't judge them, and that we can love them. I tend to have rose colored glasses. Just generally, I think I'm more of a positive thinker. I don't know. Like I give people the benefit of the doubt, and so it's funny because it can be, I think sometimes it can be jarring when I encounter people that have like a different viewpoint of the church than I do, and that's certainly the case. You're going to have people that adopt stories about their church and stories about, their priests or their community, and what it's like here. And I also just want to caution people when they do this to just be very vigilant and careful with those thoughts too, because we can tell ourselves lots of stories about how things are, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're true. It's the example that St. Paisios kind of gives us with the bee and the fly. I think about this constantly because, you can be in the same room and be like, oh, look at all these beautiful flowers. You can just see all the good things. And then you could be participating like a fly and just be like, well, the music was terrible today. And oh, the coffee hour is awful. And, like nobody said hi to me. Like we can kind of like see the trash and the bad things. And so to be careful of the thoughts and the stories that we adopt and the stories that we allow other people to share with us and accept, because I feel like these things spread like wildfire, and that's where like scandals happen in the church, people want to leave because of the lack of love here, and so I've seen variations of these in all different churches I've been a part of, even before I was Orthodox. We are the ark, and in the ark there is a lot of smelly animals, and we just have to, rev up against them and love them anyway. But I think that, being very cognizant of the stories we tell ourselves and viewing them as us, I think is important.
Yes, so important, so important. And I was recently reading a couple of things on my channel about church history and about how you see um, when there are problems in the church. I think a lot of people now want to like speak out about it and be really bold and fiery, and there's a place for that. But so many times in the lives of the saints, what you see is that people pray and they try to stay together as the church, and they pray for each other, and they try to have the good thoughts and still talk about the issues, but in a very loving and temperate way, not flying off the handle about things. And then God intervenes miraculously, like, it's Saint Euphemia in the council, and just over and over again in church history, things are solved by God. Like he comes down and solves these things. So we're not saying you have to, there might be things that are, every community is going to have issues. I was part of a community that did split apart, an Orthodox church. And,
Mm.
these things do rarely happen. There are dissensions and things that have to be worked out. But when you take on that narrative, that negative narrative that what's happening and this person did this thing or that thing, it's like you don't actually know what's going on. So we have to have humility and prayer and good thoughts for others, for the good of the church.
Mm.
So two of the things you guys just mentioned were location and this maybe the harder side of community where we're bumping up against each other. And these are two things that I think get cited when people start talking about starting online communities. So what are your thoughts on Orthodox online communities? Is that a thing? Is there a place for it?
It's like, it feels relatively new. So I think I feel a little bit skeptical of it. Mostly because I think our lives need to be less online and more in real life. And I think, kind of what we talked about earlier on, is, like community is the rubbing up against, the people that are different than you, people that are older than you, um, that are not in your same, like I'm a mom, but I don't just hang out with only moms, like I don't just want to be in a bubble of only like-minded people. That's not to say that it doesn't, it feels nice to have people that are similar interests and similar hobbies and, oh, we're Orthodox. That's really exciting. But I think I feel very skeptical. I feel very skeptical of an online community, because I think it's naturally detached from the church, and anything that's not a part of the church, it makes me feel uncomfortable. Because I think, like, again, it's like being aware of our input, like who it is we're listening to, who it is that is, guiding us, leading us, like, you know, that matters. That's why we have, spiritual fathers and priests, and God has put us in a particular place in a particular time with these particular people. It's kind of the way I say it, because I truly believe that is for our salvation, that He has placed us here for our salvation. And whether we have, this utopian view of what we were hoping for and having this sisterhood of every day, we get together with our sisters and we bake bread and we chat and, like this beautiful life that, would be wonderful to have. Like, that's not where God has us. It's not where God has placed us right now. But having the mentality of like, but this is for my salvation. This is what God brought me here for my salvation and for my family's salvation, for my husband's salvation. And when we have eternity in mind, it's like we can endure a lot more. We can endure a lot of difficulties and challenges, but it's not like God won't meet you there, And so I always kind of think of online communities as sort of a reaction to a lack of community that you feel in real life. And so we're looking to others online for this feel good, connection. But I don't think that's real. I don't think that, like you've said, we're not bearing each other's burdens. We're not like, we're, supporting each other. We can encourage each other. And I certainly have found encouragement through the internet, meeting both of you lovely ladies who I learn a lot from and really respect you. I'm thankful for that connection and being able to, hear your wisdom and apply that in my life. I'm very grateful for that. And obviously God is using those things, but I guess I feel sort of a knee-jerk reaction against it, because I think if we're pouring ourselves into this online community, we're limited people and with limited energy. And so that naturally feels to me like then we're not pouring that into our communities where God has placed us. And then maybe we are, neglecting our spiritual duties of like taking care of our neighbor and encouraging the people that are that are lonely and sitting next to you at church, that maybe you don't notice because run a little online book club going on and it's so exciting. And it's like, well, sometimes those things get translated to real life because there isn't something happening in real life. Again, maybe like this is my personality, but I'm like, it could be you. Like you could be the one to start the book club, you know, like you could be the one to like invite the older lady for tea and like ask her about her life and how she raised her kids. And, you know, when I seek, you know, support, I'm usually seeking support from people that are older than me, you know, and have gone before me and can impart wisdom. So that's my long-winded version of I'm skeptical. It's not impossible. I would just wonder who is the one who is leading it. If it were like, you know, a saint, I'd be like, sign me up. I need to like, you know, take down some notes. And but I'm thinking of it more as like a teacher and like a student. But again, how possible would that be? Probably not. You know, I probably should just go to the monastery and talk to the nuns. Like that's probably what I should do. So
Yeah, Father John and I talk about this a lot, like the online stuff, because this just wasn't something like when we became Orthodox, we read books. It was our natural character anyway. We were reading books before Orthodoxy. We were reading the Fathers before Orthodoxy, but I just feel like all things are permissible, but not all things are profitable. So it's not necessarily that an online community isn't profitable. It might be profitable.
Sure.
But I have started to strongly be, just me personally, I've started to strongly be, what's the word for it? Like disenchantized, what's the word I'm looking for? Like,
yeah.
I have seen enough online now that I'm like, I don't know that I want to be online anymore.
Yeah.
And it's not even bad stuff. It's like, I'm uncomfortable, me, who like, now the irony here is really strong. I accept it. I'm uncomfortable with people who seem to like put themselves in a position of a teacher. Like the whole like influencer mode comes across as like not a community where like I want to learn, which is valuable, right? But it seems like the more I see, it's like I want to promote myself and I want to solicit people to ask me for advice. Ask me anything. Ask me anything. And I'm like, really? You want people? Like, I don't want people to trust anything because I don't trust what I'll say. I don't know if it'll be good. So that has really kind of turned me off a bit to be like, really honest. Like what back in the day, like I had a blog for like 10 years. And I remember at that time, and now you still have a blog, Khouria, and I remember it feeling a bit like a community. Like I was living in, even though Greece, like you'd think we didn't feel lonely. Like, no, I felt lonely when I lived in Greece. And having like a community of people, like bloggers that you could like read about their experiences, I really enjoyed that and learned a lot from it.
Yeah.
Did I spend too much time online? Yeah, probably. Yeah. But there was something different about people sort of saying like, this is what I do and this is what I found helpful, versus like this new thing where it's like, kind of seems like a bit of a temptation to want to acquire people who will follow you. And to do that, you're like, why don't you ask me anything? I'm going to advise you. And people, of course, will say like, it's only my opinion and this is only what we do. And I understand that completely.
Yeah.
I just think it's really potentially dangerous. Absolutely. Because it's so easy to like fully throw ourselves into that. Like you said, you know, not be available for other people. But like spiritually, like, when we really like strip it all down, like we don't want to have a superficial perspective on our spiritual life, on what spirituality is. Yes. Spirituality is not filming ourselves praying. And like, and I do this too. Like I mean, I don't film myself praying, but I like put up pictures of like the chapel that I'm building and I'm really enthusiastic about it and I want to share that with other people. There's a temptation even within that, but it's like, I feel like it's just such a temptation to not like take a step back and really question what our motives are and whether or not our time would be better spent elsewhere. And one of the things is like, even all these clips of the sayings of saints, I have a personal problem with this because the reason why I don't like this is you read one line out of context of an entire work from the saint. And what is happening is people don't read books anymore. They don't read the writings of the saints. So everybody loves St. Pisces, right? How many people have read St. Pisces' books? He's written a lot of books. I don't know if people realize that. He himself has written, either he's personally written them or the nuns have written down homilies that he has given. But he has himself even written things. So I don't know that a lot of people know that, and like that makes me sad because that's where you're going to have a fulsome picture of what it means to become uh, like a Christian, to become a human being, is
100%.
through the writings of the saints, the full writings. So we clip and we have this one sentence, and then that can work towards whatever we want to think, oh, how nice that is. Well, if you read the sentence afterwards, actually they're telling somebody off. But you know what I'm saying? Like it's all disjointed. So I don't know, lately I'm like, I really am disenchanted with it all. And I personally, I remember when I wrote my book, the first book, I was Orthodox, I think like 6 years by then. I mean, we had lived in Greece. We had learned a lot. The intention with writing my book was to try to promote the things that the nuns had taught me.
Right.
So there's temptation in that. I wasn't very long Orthodox, it was, it could become like a self-promotion.
Right.
So those are all things that I personally will take full accountability for and say, like, I am the kind of person that Yoderson Macrina would say, teacher who teaches and doesn't practice what she preaches. When I see this more with younger people that haven't been Orthodox for very long, yes, I do find this concerning because I know what it was to learn from the nuns for years, going to the monasteries, years studying my master's degree at an Orthodox college, at an Orthodox university with very pious, very holy people. And yet I still knew very little, because when you encounter people who live and know a great deal, you always can tell that you haven't got there yet. Yeah. It doesn't matter how many things you have accomplished. You see what I'm saying? Because you're putting yourself against someone who's way beyond you. Yeah. The online sphere, the way you measure yourself, it's all superficial. It's like, I don't have as nice of a linen dress as that person does who's making her sourdough, that type of things. You know what I mean? Like, what are we really measuring ourselves by? By the person who films themselves saying prayers? Like, we don't know how they manifest in everyday life, what that looks like. Maybe they're amazing saints, but I don't know. And just seeing them do their prayers on a video does not communicate that to me, because these things can only be communicating in an authentic space. So what really has like struck me is recently I read Ama Siglatiki, who is a desert mother. I've never read her sayings in totality. They're in all kinds of different places. They're in I forget the notes, they're in different places, but I never just like read it all collected together. And it really struck me when she lived in asceticism for years. She lived she was an ascetic and lived on her own. And gradually, of course, word gets out that this holy person who lives a very ascetical life, lives in such and such a place, and people started to come to her for advice. So these women would come to her and they would ask advice from her. And she was uncomfortable with that. Look, we have the same teachers. Yeah. You and I have the same teachers, the Old and the New Testament. There's nothing I can tell you that you can't yourself learn. But they would push her and they would say, and they would kind of appeal to her based on the scriptures. Like, it's important to condescend for the sake of the lesser brethren, all these things. And when they kind of pushed her to teach them more, she broke down and cried like a baby. It says, wept like a baby, because she understood the danger, the spiritual danger in making herself a teacher. So she wept. They again adjourned her. They asked her not to weep. They explained themselves. And so it says in her life, it says, and she opened her mouth, and this is what she said. And then it's like the next 3/4 of the book are her teachings. I just think it's really important. We don't know this, right? We come into the Orthodox Church and we see what's online. We don't necessarily get to encounter an Ama Siglatiki. You don't get to live in Greece where you have so many teachers around you that you can contrast yourself with. So when people become Orthodox, they might not get this opportunity to meet someone like that. And when they see people online, they think that that's the status quo. That's what I would say would concern me. The status quo isn't for us to make ourselves a teacher. And I understand that I am the the kettle calling the pot black, or the pot calling the kettle black. I understand that, but
okay. Oh, sorry. Technical difficulties.
Well, I know you have to go, so we wanted to give you the option.
I've got a little time. We can.
But here, this is what we're famous for: getting to the end, and then we, hit gold, and it's like, okay.
So I just finished to say, that's what concerns me, is just that when you don't have, in the absence of having an Ama Siglatiki or professors at an Orthodox university, or all these spiritual people around you, that when we look on the internet, we think that that's the status quo, that making myself a teacher is the status quo, and that somehow is the way to go about things, when it at very least, if maybe it's blessed, but at very least we should take a step back and really consider if that's the best mode of creating a community.
Absolutely. I mean, participating in the influencer sphere, I think it's very strange. I would never call myself that. That's like a very strange thing. But um, I encounter people, like I'll meet people and they think that they know me. And this is a really strange experience that I've had, because I'm like, you don't know me at all. Like, it's kind of like the experience of someone who just meets you on Sunday. Oh, you're so calm. And, they have like perceptions of you. It's the same with the internet, because it's heavily filtered. It's heavily, I'm only showing what I feel like showing. And my purpose isn't necessarily to like show real life, which is a temptation that is presented on the internet, is to like show your authentic, real self. And, we kind of are like allergic to anybody who's fake or something like that. But I, I think that just naturally the internet is not a place of authenticity, or in a like showing me who I really am and my sins, that my family knows, that my husband knows, that my spiritual father knows that, and my friends know that. They know who I am because I interact with them, like that's who I am. But you brought up a really good point of like looking to people on the internet, that just to add another layer, like we have priests on the internet, and this is even more confusing because they're not your priest, and they're teaching things that are maybe contrary to what your priest is teaching. And so it can cause a lot of confusion. And so I say this all the time, that there's great temptations on the internet, both as a content creator and as a consumer of the internet, like there's a lot of temptations, and I have been tempted countless times, even like wanting to comment on something, and it's like I literally never comment an angry comment. Not that I haven't ever, I have certainly, and then I have to like delete it or go to confession or something. But my husband keeps me in check too, because he doesn't have social media, and so I always talk to him about, things that I'm sharing and going, oh, does this sound stupid? But I also recognize, for me, like what I share reflects on my husband and his reputation. So I am very careful about what I share, because it doesn't just influence me, it influences, you know, people, how people perceive my husband, or how people perceive the Orthodox Church. If you are putting yourself in a position of teaching, so to speak, which I do, I show people like about the feast days or something like that, in the context of being like an elementary teacher, like that was my training. So like, here's how you can teach it to your kids, or here's how I do it in my family. I genuinely share it from a place of my own experience, but not as an authority, and people will message me things, and I always refer them to their priest. I'm like, I'm a nobody, like I'm not clergy, and even if I was, like, I don't know you, how am I going to speak to that, I have to go to the particular place, to particular people that God has given us. And again, as much as we can encourage people, that could be okay. But every word that we write, every word that we say and we speak, we're going to be held accountable to on the final day of judgment. And that's a fearful thing. That's a very fearful thing. And we never want to participate in, leading someone astray or leading them away from Christ. God forbid, but that is a possibility, and we have to be aware of that. And also, everything we say isn't necessarily from ourselves. Like, so if we're repeating something we've heard, now we're participating in the work of, evil one in times, like we have to be very careful and vigilant. This is like something I say a lot, but we have to be vigilant and careful about our thoughts and what we say and what we speak and how we speak about them. And ultimately, I mean, part of my work, I think of, is sort of evangelistic in a sense. Like, I just want to show the beauty of the Orthodox faith and make it sort of like accessible in a way that people like don't feel those barriers. Like, there may be cultural, there may be other barriers that you find you encounter in real life, but the church is for all people in all places and in all cultures, And so I like showing, like, highlighting some of those things. And I definitely don't do it perfectly. And I'm sure, many times made mistakes. God help me. But we have to be very careful of who we're listening to. And again, like you said, putting ourselves in like a position of influence or teaching, we have to be very careful about that sort of thing and make sure that we have God's blessing to do it, right? Like that's another thing too. You know, there's a proper order to things too. And so I kind of do like the trend of like ask your priest, because people are so quick to offer advice about things they know nothing about and shouldn't speak about. And it can cause a lot of strife and struggle and doubts in people that are really serious, that have very serious implications, you know. And my husband, being a priest, deals with that a lot, especially with, you know, having a lot of converts or inquirers or catechumens. You know, they're essentially being educated through the internet, and so my husband has to kind of break them out of that at times, because it's like, just because you saw that on the internet does not mean that is the Orthodox teaching on this matter. And you know, it sometimes feels like an uphill battle, you know, because the internet is so saturated with so many different voices that it's hard to know who to listen to. But I think what you said, Matushka, about like reading the lives of the saints, reading the saints themselves, absolutely. People ask at times like, "Oh, what book would you recommend?" I didn't read one book before I became Orthodox. I wasn't reading anything. I was going to catechism and I was living in the community, and we didn't have Instagram, and I wasn't looking. I guess we had YouTube. I never went on YouTube. I wasn't learning from the internet. I was learning from the people in my parish in real life and talking to my husband about it. I'm not like an academic person. But when I became Orthodox, I couldn't get enough of the life of the saints, because that's when I realized, like you said, by that measure, oh, I'm, you know, 1,000 years away from being a saint. Like, how will I ever get there? Like, you read them and you can compare them. And that is certainly how I recognize what it means to be a Christian, is reading lives of the saints, reading the saints themselves. I think that is like, you know, that's what we all should be doing, to like a palate cleanser from what we're hearing and seeing from others online. So that was my very long-winded answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, and again, it kind of goes full circle with what we were talking about before, is what is the nature of the church, and the nature there's a physical reality to it. And so if you're, you know, a community can be helpful, but it might not be helpful in every situation. But it's not the church. It can't be, you can't disorder these things to where you think the community, the online community, is going to somehow replace the parish.
Yes.
It's,
Yes.
you know, the parish is fundamental. The life in the physical church is fundamental. And maybe a community would be helpful, and maybe it isn't, depending on the community. I did just join Father Turbo's, what is it, Synaxis of Sophia, and it's been wonderful. It's been really wonderful. There is something that if you're in a little bit of a private group, you can share more openly. You know, he is a priest. Like, you know, there are some really great things out there, but that is very different from someone who's been in the church for, you know, 2 months and is putting out things, you know. So you have to measure these things. They're not all the same. And there's so many temptations, both for content producers and content consumers. It's just, I know, Matushka, you and I have talked about this in the past. It's a constant fear of mine that I'm going to lose my soul over this stupid channel. Like, I don't want to do that. So if you just see me disappear one day, that's why. I just don't want to, you know, I don't want to lose my salvation over a YouTube channel. This is crazy. So, you know, turn it off, everybody out there, and just go to church, you know,
Go to
be a part of the
church.
community.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I
ask
say
your
the
own
same
priest.
thing.
Yeah.
I say the same thing. It's like if my channel disappeared and, you know, whatever, I'd be like, thank you for what I was able to do. And I'm going to go just like, you know, serve my church, which is what I'm doing. You know, it's like my life wouldn't change dramatically. They'd carry on. So, but, you know, we thank God for the opportunities and pray for our salvation, because it's a fearful thing.
Yeah. And I mean, in your case, Christina, the videos that you put are like full length lives of the saints, like writings of bishops, different things that, like, I don't have a problem with the internet. Like, I think that's awesome, but like, listen to things there's so many resources now. You can listen to lives of the saints. This Aconite Audio, it's a YouTube channel that amazing recordings of tons of Orthodox books. If you're cleaning your house, if you're going for a
Yes.
walk, if you're doing yard work, listen to an Orthodox book then. Like
Yes.
podcasts are great. They have a place, but even better than that is the actual sayings of our saints and this YouTube channel. Maybe there's other ones like it out there. I'm not sure. And I know they're on Spotify as well. I don't know how to use Spotify. I can't figure it out, but they're on Spotify. But
that's how I listened to your book, by the way. I would listen to your book on Audible, and it was amazing. It was just like every day I could listen to your voice sing it or to say the words, and it felt like this little hug, like it was so comforting to hear the words of encouragement of your own experiences with these nuns and the wisdom that they shared with you, and Christina, I was just telling my husband, because he was like, what is this YouTube channel? And, who are these people?
I don't know.
You and getting yourself involved in.
Yeah, like, what are you doing? And I was talking about it, but you did a talk, I think it was the first video I ever watched, about homeschooling. And I'm like in tears because I'm listening to it and I'm like, this is like, it's like you're saying the words that are true, that I know to be true, but I didn't have the words for them. And they were so encouraging to hear somebody with a really balanced perspective who's, raised your kids, and you can see the fruit of your labor. It's evident in your children, which I don't know them, but I can see just like a picture that it has blessed me even just through your channel and through your book. So like, just, giving these examples of how they can translate to real life, and that the Lord is using it to touch people. But again, with a heavy caution.
Yeah, that's the hard part for me, is that, I'm making those kind of videos, and that's what I'm kind of fearful. Like, I love putting out the lives of the saints, but the things that are my own opinion about things, about homeschooling, about whether or not you should celebrate Halloween, like, I'm putting it out there. Here's my opinion.
Yes.
And it's like, it's just my opinion. It's not, this is not gospel, but there's so many internal temptations around that. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, it's really hard. It's a really hard, battle that I have to fight. And who am I to tell you like how to homeschool your kids or whatever. But the other side is, I see the need. I was that homeschool mom who didn't have any Orthodox homeschoolers. I knew like 3. We had the very first homeschool conference in Santa Rosa in like 2003. There were 6 of us there. That's how few of us there were. So it's in my own heart, I'm trying to balance, like, there's this great need that I'm trying to help with, but ultimately it's Christ that feels the need. It's not me, Christina, who's going to go and tell all of these women what they need to hear. That's not reality. Like, it's just, we do our little part, and then God fills in all of the lack that we have. But it's frightening. I feel really actually frightened about the position I've put myself in at times, even though I do have the blessing. I have a couple blessings to do this from different people, but the temptations are real. And I don't want to be like Father Melchizedek, which I think we talked about Matushka once, who, he was the brother at the monastery in Russia somewhere, and he was the carpenter, and he just made all this carpentry, and then one day he fell down dead and had a vision of the Panagia telling him, all I wanted was you. All I wanted was your prayer. And you gave me a bunch of woodworking. And I think, is that what God's going to say to me one day? Like, we just wanted you to pray. And all you made are all these stupid videos, like.
Yeah. Talk to me. Don't, God help us.
God help us, So anyway, sorry, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, but it's a real fear that I have. And if you're not online and you're not scared about what you're doing online,
there you go.
I think you should be, no matter if you're producing or consuming or both. Like, you can lose your soul in this place.
All these roles that we're in are roles in a certain sense of authority, right? Being a priest's wife, being a content creator, and we will give answer to that. And so, like, to go back to something that Khouria said earlier about about giving. We're going to have to give an account of that to Christ. And so at the end of the day, what I would hope people would want to ask themselves is, okay, it's all over now. It's done. You are able to look back on the totality of your life. Yeah. Is that how you wanted to spend your time? Because I know I don't want to have spent my time just mindlessly scrolling or just comparing myself to some random person who I don't even know, or more likely judging them. judging some random girl who I don't even know because of whatever random stupid opinion I have. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't want to be in a position where I had all this time and I didn't do the right things with it. And that's something that you hear constantly about from the lives of the saints. Saint Herman of Alaska, right? Saint Father Sarah from Rose, it's later than you think. Khouria often talks about that. Like, we need to have our suitcases packed for paradise, so that if today I drop dead, my suitcases are filled with my prayers, with my confession, with my forgiveness, and with my repentance. So all of these things can be good. Everything is permissible, but not all things are profitable. And we just want to make sure that whatever we're spending our time on, whatever community we're building, that we're building it for the glory of God, for us to actually come closer to God. And if it's prohibiting us from being closer to God, then it is not profitable and we should cut it off. All of us, like me first. So I think if that is what we have in mind, that's the fear that fuels us, then we won't necessarily go so astray, right? Because that fear actually will keep us more in the middle path. It is very valuable to have that fear. So if you're online and don't have that fear, have that fear.
That's beautiful to say. Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking of Saint Anthony the Great as well, when he encountered the temptation of the money in the desert. And to him, his question wasn't like, well, like, should I do with the money? You know, it was like, is this for my salvation, or is it to, like, you know, to bring me closer to Christ, or is it to take me farther away from him? And he stepped over it like fire. It's like innately, it's like, it's not bad. Money itself isn't bad, but we have to ask ourselves those things, you know, and you know, there's some good questions to ask ourselves with a lot of things that we do, but particularly online.
Yeah. Well, thank you, ladies. Thank you. It was a wonderful discussion. Anything you want to shout out or let people know where to find you online?
Where do we find you online? We find
Where do
you
we
in your
find you?
books.
Well, okay, Matushka, where do we find you?
Yes.
Your books?
Yeah, you can find my books there. I need to do a better job of promoting this. Someone emailed me today. We're like, can you send me a link to the book you're holding in your profile picture? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've never even done. I thought I did. I thought I posted when I got the book in the mail, but I don't know how to use Instagram very well. So I think I must have just posted as like a picture that disappears, like a story.
Oh gosh.
So I'm like, I got to be more diligent about that. But
yes,
yeah, you can find my books, and my books are great in a certain extent. Like they offer what they offer. They would be maybe like an appetizer, right? But like their true meaty things are in the lives of the saints and in the writings of the saints. There's people that are in my books that were saints, that are saints, that I encountered. So in as much as that's beneficial, then like I absolutely, it's I would encourage people to read them. But mostly, like, just honestly seek an authentic relationship with the saints, with the church through. And if you're a book reader, read the books that are written by the saints. And if you don't feel like that's like, because it's not always able for us to dive right in, okay, then you can start with these books. They're an appetizer, but certainly they're not the most protein. The most spiritual protein you're going to get are going to be my books.
Well, I thoroughly enjoy them. And as I told you, they came to me in an important time in my life. But, if you're sitting by the lake or the beach and you want something a little lighter, perfect. It's still very spiritual and,
yes.
Yeah, it's great.
I call them more of a dessert. Okay, they're not appetizers. They're like a little dessert. They're wonderful. I've read them, and I'm reading through Upon This Rock right now. So I shared it with a priest wife friend of mine, and we sent each other passages back and forth, and we really enjoy it. So as far as the work that I do, I am on Instagram, Ascetic Life of Motherhood, and I also have a blog with the same name, asceticlifeofmotherhood.com. And so on my blog is years worth of, putting together resources for celebrating the feasts, and different traditions that I have picked up along the way from the different communities that I've been a part of. So I like to show just sort of examples of how that looks in our home. And I also create printables and things for people to consolidate those big blog posts into like a little page. which is something that I needed it at a certain specific time. And so I created that for our homeschool and for our parish. And so we hand those out to our parishioners as well. As just a little appetizer of like how you can bring Christ into your home in a meaningful way, especially with small children in your home. So that's what I like to share and talk about online. So thank you so much for having me. It was a privilege and an honor to be with you two ladies who I highly respect and admire, and I feel honored to be included with you today.
Well, thanks for being here, both of you. Okay, Matushka, you want to close with our prayer?
Sure. Through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, O Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for being here, everyone.